Welcome to Amit Shakil's 5858 War and Love Report. I am Amir.
President Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov has denied the Kremlin had anything to do with the death of the Wagner Group's leaders.
Ukrainian pilots are set to get F-16 training from the United States as Ukraine steps up its counteroffensive.
The head of Spain's Football Federation has defied calls for him to quit over the kiss he gave player Jenny Hermoso at the World Cup.
Donald Trump makes history with a police mugshot and an arrest over election meddling claims.
The EU's biggest ever shake-up of digital regulation comes into force, aimed at restricting harmful content and giving users more power over what they see.
Flowers and candles, tributes to plane crash victims Yevgeny Prigozhin and his associates in Moscow and in Rostov-on-Don, where Wagner's mutiny first took hold. The Kremlin has denied killing the mercenaries, President Putin's spokesman urging patience as the official investigation proceeds.
Сейчас, естественно, вокруг этой катастрофы и вокруг трагической гибели пассажиров самолета, в том числе Евгения Пригожина, очень много спекуляций. Конечно же, на Западе все эти спекуляции подаются с известного угла. Все это ложь абсолютно. И здесь, конечно, нужно исключительно, освещая эту проблематику, основываться все-таки на фактах.
The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claims that Kyiv had nothing to do with the death of Prigozhin. His office called the crash Putin's message to elites before the upcoming elections. Russian media reports one line of inquiry is that a bomb had been placed on the plane.
The United States has said it will begin to train Ukrainian pilots how to fly F-16 fighter jets. On Thursday, the Pentagon said they'd begin with English language lessons in September and provide in-flight training in October. The move comes as Denmark and Netherlands announced they'd send F-16s to Ukraine after Washington gave the go-ahead to send third-party fighter jets. And Norway's Prime Minister has agreed to do the same.
When the United States gave a green light to training of pilots and all the infrastructure around, Norway immediately supported that pledge, and Norwegian trainers are taking part with the other countries working on this together.
Meanwhile, Ukraine says it has destroyed a Russian surface-to-air missile defense system in Crimea. And video footage appears to show special forces raising the Ukrainian flag in Russian-annexed Crimea following special joint operations in the region.
When Spain's Football Federation called an emergency meeting, the country's media assumed the organization's president would draw a line under the Kissgate scandal by falling on his sword. The Spanish women's historic World Cup win had been overshadowed by the kiss on the lips he'd given player Jenny Hermoso, and his resignation had been touted. The president had other ideas.
¿Ustedes creen que tengo que dimitir? Pues les voy a decir algo. No voy a dimitir. No voy a dimitir. No voy a dimitir. No voy a dimitir. No voy a dimitir.
Rubiales claims the kiss was consensual and that he's been the victim of feminist forces in the sport, despite applause from the male managers of both the men's and women's national sides at the meeting. The president's stance is likely to set him at odds with many who believe male chauvinism overshadows the women's game, with Spain's acting prime minister stating an apology from Rubiales would be insufficient. His refusal to resign was condemned by Spain's higher council for sport.
What is prohibited offline must be prohibited online. That's the general thrust of the EU's biggest ever shake-up of online regulation. The Digital Services Act came into force on Friday. It's aimed at keeping users safe online and stopping the spread of hate speech or harmful content that's either illegal or violates a platform's terms of service, such as a promotion of genocide or anorexia. Social networks, search engines and marketplaces like Amazon and Google will have to comply or face hefty fines, and users will have more control.
So specifically, users will now have more transparency on how content moderation decisions are made. Users will have more choice regarding the content that they engage in. So, for example, they can opt out of personalized advertising, or they can determine that the content that they see is presented in a chronological order rather than based on determinations of the recommender systems that are based on vast amounts of data collection. There will be more mechanisms for complaints and mechanisms for redress for individual users.
For the time being, only the 19 largest companies, those with more than 45 million monthly users, are affected. The others have until February to comply. Not all of them are happy and some are pushing back, but for now, they'll have to play ball. Some digital giants have already announced the measures they're putting in place to adapt to the new environment.
Let's talk about this.
So, for example, we have seen several platforms coming forward in the last few days to outline some of the measures that they will be adopting. This includes Meta, for example, Google and Snapchat, and TikTok in particular has also outlined some of the measures that they will be adopting, including how they will increase their transparency and their accountability for users in the European Union, and of course how this will impact users more globally as well. Interestingly, however, TikTok and the company formerly known as Twitter underwent stress tests earlier this summer, in which the European Commission noted that much more work was actually needed in order for both platforms to be compliant with the law.
Certain targeted advertisements, particularly those aimed at minors, are now prohibited, as are those based on sensitive data such as sexual orientation or religion. In the event of infringement, companies face big fines. But Brussels insiders have pointed out some notable emissions, like eBay, Airbnb, Netflix, and even Pornhub.
Residents of the Greek town of Avas returned to see the ruins of their village after devastating wildfires burned through the area. One of them is Apostolos, whose house was among the 8 burnt.
All around the village. My house has been burnt.
Really?
No. Total.
Какво ще правите сега?
I don't know.
Имате ли къде да живеете?
But, I have to take directions from the community authorities or something.
Grateful to still be alive and well, Apostolos goes to the chapel to pray and light a candle for his loved ones. The last few days have also been extremely difficult for authorities.
It was so hard because the fire was everywhere. It was so big, you can see. In one moment, the fire was from one side of the village to the other side. We gave the people to evacuate the village.
The traffic in the area has now been restored after a curfew installed by the regional transport authorities was lifted. Meanwhile, hundreds of firefighters from EU countries are still working around the clock to tackle the blaze in northeastern Greece. Making history, the first ever police mugshot of a former or serving US president was taken of Donald Trump on Thursday at Fulton County Jail in Atlanta. He was briefly arrested after surrendering on charges he illegally schemed to overturn the 2020 election in Georgia. It's the 4th criminal case against Trump since March, when he became the first former president in US history to be indicted.
What has taken place here is a travesty of justice. We did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. And everybody knows it. I've never had such support. And that goes with the other ones too. What they're doing is election interference. They're trying to interfere with an election. There's never been anything like it in our country before. This is their way of campaigning. Thank you.
Trump and 18 others were indicted last week, accused of participating in a conspiracy to overturn his presidential election loss to Democrat Joe Biden. But he still remains the leading candidate for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination.
Japan
Japan's Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant has begun its second day of its controversial release of purified water into the sea. The process to release 1.3 million tonnes of wastewater could take 30 to 40 years. Before this controversial move, the stored water was treated, and both the Tokyo Electronic Power Company and the UN Atomic Watchdog, the IAEA, have said that the water does not pose a health risk. But many in Japan and abroad are still skeptical. Local fishermen are concerned about their livelihoods, and some residents say they will avoid eating seafood. China has called the release a selfish act and has banned the import of Japanese seafood. The main opposition party in South Korea called for a halt to the operation, with many of its members taking to the streets in protest. According to Japanese authorities, the reservoirs have to be emptied to decommission the plant, which suffered a serious accident due to an earthquake and tsunami in 2011. Emperor penguins depend on stable sea ice to raise chicks. But as seen here, sea ice in Antarctica eroded by record levels in 2022, causing young penguins to fall into freezing water and ultimately killing all of the chicks that lived in this area. That's according to research released by the British Antarctica Survey. Experts noticed sea ice levels in 2022 completely disappeared.
The key finding is that penguins nest on sea ice, and they need that substrate to last beyond December in order to support their breeding season successfully. So if it breaks up earlier than early December, the chicks will actually fall into the sea and they will drown. If they manage to scramble out of the sea, their plumage will be wetted and they'll die of hypothermia. Alternatively, they may be able to stay on ice floes, but they drift away and then the parents can't find them and they will starve to death.
While it's possible for the population to recover from 1 or 2 bad breeding years, there is worry about the penguin.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.